Welcome to the Two Blokes Chatting radio show on 94.7 The Pulse. Music, interviews, news, and, well, Two Blokes Chatting. Now, here are the two blokes.
And we are very pleased to have on the telephone someone who played 28 games and kicked 11 goals for Geelong, and then he went to Sydney and kicked 46 goals in 95 games, and I slipped my shoes and socks off. That makes 123 games and 57 goals. Robert Cameron, do the honours if you would be so kind.
David Bolton has been kind enough to join us, not a stranger to this show. I think he's been on the phone once and in the studio with Ray Sarcevic, which was one of the joys of me doing radio interviewing. That was a very funny morning. Bolts, good morning to you.
Morning, Rob.
Thank you very much for coming on board again. It's always lovely to have a chat. And look, this has been inspired by me remembering the wonderful gesture of your lovely wife, Linda, to gather up all your dirty old football jumpers out of the cupboard and put them into frames on the wall. And it reads something like Woodville, West Torrens, Geelong, Sydney, South Australian State of Origin, Victorian State of Origin, New South Wales State of Origin, and Australian v Ireland games. Quite an array, and I reckon at your age now you'd still look back on the wall with a bit of pride.
Yes, Rob, and you forgot the Wolf Cubs under 10s as well.
Sorry. And that's where it all started.
Yeah. That's correct. Yeah, YMCA down at the Wreck. It was good times. Yeah, all those jumpers bring back lots of good memories, and I like to look back and through the photos and see how a lot of guys have changed, and some have moved on to greener pastures, but yeah, good memories in a lot of them.
We were talking about Malcolm Blight earlier with that famous turnaround v Essendon in the 1989 final series and a bit of his unusual stuff. You saw it first-hand and often. Where did he rate with the oddities of your football career?
A little bit hard to say. Look, I'd like to think that I'm with Malcolm, certainly with his trains of thought sometimes to take it to different levels and different realms to get something different happening to what's actually happening at the time. And he's certainly the master of that. He'd come up with a lot of different things that didn't even relate to football and get you thinking a bit. It was really good.
But he's also very meticulous, attention to detail, preparation, all that sort of stuff, which many thought that was an odd mix with the odd stuff that he did. He still was quite professional in his and his expectation of others. Absolutely.
One thing that he's scarred me with for life is that he taught us, probably in one of the first meetings we had, was always to tie your bootlaces up on the inside so the knot that you tied didn't affect your kicking once the ball hit your foot. It was a complete flat surface, and I took it to the next level and have done my shoes up on the inside for the rest of my life. And I bumped into him in the airport a few years ago and told him, look how he'd scarred my life by putting that. And he looked down at my shoes and said, well, at least you've learned something.
Well, we had Sean Simpson. It's Neil here. David, how you going? We had Sean Simpson wearing his socks up to his knees all the time, and his son's still doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you can't look like one, can't be one, look like one was his theory. Just going back those times where you'd played a bit of under-19s or a lot of under-19s, a bit of seconds at Geelong, how did the move to South Australia come about, and did you get influence, or was it your own thought process to advance your career?
No, I'd actually played about 4 or 5 games in the seconds down at Geelong when I was still in the under-19s, and that was under Rod Olsen, and had a bit of success. And then the following year, Rod was moved on, and then Billy Goggin had come in and taken over, and I wasn't basically the flavour of what was happening down there, and I couldn't break in. So Rod had extended an invitation to come across to South Australia. He had a guy come across to watch me play at Grovedale that year, and said to Rod, yeah, we'd like to have him over straight away. So within 2 weeks, I was over there running around for Woodville. That's how quickly that happened. And
your expectation of, you've played VFL seconds, and there's always the argument, I know I've got a lot of South Australian friends who still think that's the best comp in the world. How close was it to that bit of Geelong seconds that you experienced?
In going across to South Australia?
Yeah, just the actual competition, the level of the footy for Woodville.
Oh, look, I felt it was a lot stronger than VFL seconds. It was just that there was a lot of guys playing there at the time that could have honestly played VFL and just didn't want to move over, just didn't want to come across to Victoria. And Michael Ashe, he's the uncle of James Ashe, he was probably the biggest standout of one of the guys that didn't really want to come across and play, but he would have, just absolutely brained it over here. And another guy was Garry Mcintosh. He would have brained it as well, along with a few other players. He was a different a different type of player, but a very good player as well. And you could see those guys stand out in the State of Origin when they played against Victoria as well.
And those harder edge older bodies. We saw it firsthand in a VFL game last year when Geelong went down to play Port Melbourne, and we didn't know anyone in the Port Melbourne side because they hadn't had any profile, but they were all late 20s, early 30s, hard bodies, been playing that really good footy for a long time, and they smashed the Geelong kids. And I guess in the SANFL, there would have been a lot of those types of characters that hadn't drifted out of the game, still wanting to play at the highest level possible.
Yeah, that's true. Port Adelaide had a fair few of those blokes. They also had a few guys that sort of had cracks at the VFL over here, didn't quite make it, and then they'd make their way over there. A bloke from Essendon who played with us was a guy called Ken Mansfield, who played quite a few games at Essendon, Peter Fitzpatrick, these sort of guys. He was at St Kilda. They were guys that had been half-handy footballers at VFL level, but really couldn't make it on a consistent basis. Those sort of guys would make it a really tough competition to be in.
I guess that has dropped away a bit now because those guys can, in fact, play in the Port Adelaide system, as well as obviously being drafted around, because when you were doing that, obviously there was no such thing as the draft. But it would suggest that, with those guys playing effectively a South Australian level of VFL, if that makes sense, that standard would have dropped away in the SANFL a bit these days, you would expect.
Yeah, I would think so. And the lure to go over there to come back into the competition here, that's what I try to use it as a stepping stone to get back to the VFL. And that's what it was sold to me as at that time. That lure now is probably not as great, because you can go and play VFL and you can still, be spotted and picked up as a older recruit out of country areas as well.
The other thing that's affected the SANFL, and I've had that firsthand from playing or being involved in a club in the country of South Australia, is a lot of these good SANFL players in their mid to late 20s realise they're not going to get drafted. They're going out in the country for huge amounts of money, train one night a week in Adelaide, and then just make the trip on the weekend and pocket a lot of cash, and it's pulling a huge amount of those high quality, classy players out of the competition. So it's probably fallen away for that reason as well.
The VFL, same thing with VFL.
Yeah. There's a lot more money in country footy. The call to come back to Geelong, how did that take place after you'd had those couple of years over there?
Yeah, well, I had 3 years over there, and surprisingly enough, it was Bill Goggin was the recruiting officer of Geelong then, and Tom Hafey was the coach. So Bill asked me to come back, which I was happy enough to do. And talking to Malcolm, he wasn't that keen for me to return to Geelong. He said, you can make a life here in South Australia. You've got a good name for yourself here now. But I still sort of had a burning desire to get back and have a crack at the top level and also return to a family environment.
And the transition was pretty slick. You were very quickly into a comfortable spot on the wing in a pretty reasonably handy and young, uplifting Geelong side. It looked like a new era was dawning, and a pretty good time for the club. Well, it looked like it was going to be. It changed for other reasons, but you enjoyed coming home?
Yeah, that was good, and I was given an opportunity basically straight up. I played in the first game of that year that I did come back, and along with Greg Williams and Gary Ablett and Jacko, they all made their debuts on that day as well. So it was a pretty handy side with a few good recruits coming in as well. Two of the best that's ever played. So it was a good time.
Then a couple of years later, you find yourself on an aeroplane heading in a northerly direction in what could only be, from the outside view looking in, must have been an extraordinary experience to be up in Sydney for, their second or third full season up there?
Yeah, it was. And basically, to tell you the truth, at that time, Rob, it all came down to an economic situation. I was guaranteed if I played every game at Geelong, I would receive $28,000. And all I had to do to sign on to play a game up in Sydney was agree to play, and I was guaranteed a sum of $150,000. So with 3 kids and no real formal, good qualifications in education to take me to anywhere in business, I elected to go up there for the cash, I suppose.
And I'm a non-Geelong person, David. I grew up in Melbourne. That's where I think I first spotted you playing for Sydney. As far as a Geelong player, I didn't you weren't a big name, but you were up there with some amazing names. And there's obviously one who used to wear number 39, who gets a fair bit of press over the journey. But there must have been some other extraordinary players. I'm thinking guys like Ricky Quaid, Gerard Healy would have been up there at that stage. I suspect.
Healy, Barry Mitchell.
And Greg Williams would have fronted up there at some stage during all that, wouldn't he?
A couple of Carrolls.
Yeah.
Williams was on the same plane as David.
Yeah.
Amazing
times.
At that time, I think there was about 8 or 9 guys recruited out of all other sides around Melbourne. There was Jim Edmund from the captain of Fitzgrey, and there was Merv Nagel from Essendon. Maurice Rioli was also recruited, but he went up and played a practice match but didn't continue on. But there's Paul Morwood came back to the club at that time from St Kilda. He'd left the Swans to go to St Kilda, so he came back up. There's a number of great players running around there at that time.
And the similarities in game style to Malcolm Blight and Tommy Hafey, which was just grab, run, score lots, don't worry too much about what the opposition do, but completely different personalities. Did they have... Was it a case of having the same desired outcome but a completely different approach to get there?
Look, I believe at that time it didn't revolve too much around defence, which... especially at Sydney, you only had to see some of the high-scoring games that we played in. I think we won by 180 to 200 points 3 weeks in a row up there, kicking well in excess of 30 goals. So you can see by that it was just a more an attacking style of game back then. Rush it forward, kick it long, and you got someone like Warwick Capper down there, one kick out of the square, and he'd be standing on some bloke's head. So it didn't matter which way it went down there. If it was in his area, you were always a good chance for him to mark it, or you'd bring it to the ground for the likes of Wright and Garry Mitchell and these sort of guys that would clean up and kick goals. So it was just a different style of game, the way it was played.
As a youngster, we used to love going out to the Western Oval at Geelong to watch Billy Goggins' Roosters play. That was a standard entertainment, but there was nothing more enjoyable than turning the telly on a Sunday afternoon for a Sydney Swans home game in those days, because you can guarantee it was going to be jam-packed entertainment, just great to watch. And Sydney became everyone's second team, very much on the back of the Geelong connection for some with Hafey, Williams, Toohey and yourself, but just great footy to watch. Was it exhilarating to play it?
Yeah, it was, especially up there in Sydney, smaller style of ground. Felt like the crowd was right in amongst it all the time. It was the kicking off of the Swanettes. Some of those games would kick in excess of 30 goals. They get up and jump for every goal and do a dance. I think they were jacking it quite sometimes.
That's funny. I barracked for Fitzroy, and ours were bored senseless because they got 3 goals a game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was the time with the professionalism, and you mentioned the difference in pay packet, and your story was quite common with a lot of other footballers. I know Alan Woodman, another highly decorated local player who left to go and coach St Albans for more money than he was going to get at Geelong. It seems ridiculous at the time, but it certainly changed the face of the game, the Sydney experience. Many would argue for better or for worse, is another matter, but as a group, you clearly bought into what Hafey was selling and seemed to really enjoy each other's company. And I guess a lot of ex-Victorians up in Sydney, that extended into the social life as well.
Yeah, a lot of us lived through the Sutherland Shire down near Cronulla there, and we all sort of bonded together. We'd be having family barbecues and nights around at each other's places as a group. So it wasn't too much of... what can I say? When you're down here and you're all sort of... You're in Geelong, but you're still with family all the time. Up there we had to sort of make our own extended family to be together, and Tommy Hafey's biggest strength, I believe, was being able to bond the players, especially in his first 2 to 3 years as a coach. After that, Tommy's training and ideas probably didn't change too much to suit the style of the game that was changing. So a lot of us probably, I don't know, whether we sort of got to a boredom stage or we felt like we were always catching up after those first 2 years of footy under Tom's coaching. So his biggest impact was being able to bring all the guys together and then, you know, in his first 2 years certainly make a big influence on us.
Speaking of boring, Warwick Capper would hardly have ever had a boring moment in his career. Did he just get to the stage of him being an absolute pain in the neck around the place, or was he just this constant source of amusement?
Well, with Warwick, with his footy, he'd certainly take that serious enough when he'd be playing. And even when he was training, there was no, you know, he wouldn't goof off. Of course, he would just say absolutely stupid things which weren't meant to be funny, but being Warwick, it just ended up being funny.
A bit like dealing with Rob.
Funny, and it's working the opposite against him, I suppose. But yeah, no, he was an absolutely great footballer, and he knew his limitations where he could kick goals from on the ground, and he didn't work too far out of that.
Yeah, well,
I certainly wouldn't have been one to want to play against him one-on-one. Back down on a goal square the way it was played back then.
Not dissimilar to another man who used to prowl the goal squares at Sydney and Tony Lockett, but again, different characters, but again, knew their game and didn't get too much outside of it, but were both very productive. One a superstar champion, another one probably just, I don't know how you spell it. I don't think champion's the right word for the whiz.
Legend. In a totally different way. Because, of course, he was a Brisbane player as well, so we're going to claim him a little bit. Yeah.
Bolts, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. There's so many more avenues we could have gone down. We only got about halfway through your long and illustrious career. Would love to have talked about the playing for Australia stuff and some of the characters that used to maybe beat up on you and you on them on the ground and then become teammates. I'm always intrigued by those stories when you meet, but we'll save that for another day because we have run out of time, but I really appreciate your time this morning.
No worries, guys. Thanks for the chat.
All the very best.
Thanks, David.